Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here, and today I got a brand new deck tech here for you out of Murders at Karlov Manor. This one is for Voja, I believe it's pronounced. I was pronouncing it Voja the last time I talked about it, and I saw the live stream that Wizards of the Coast put up, and they were saying Voja, so I guess it's Voja. Jaws of the Conclave, 2 red, green, and a white for a 5/5 legendary creature wolf. Has Vigilance, Trample, and Ward 3. Absolutely fantastic keywords there. Ward 3 on your 5-mana commander is just nuts. I love that. Your opponents definitely will not. However, whenever Voja, Jaws of the Conclave, attacks, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. Then you draw a card for each wolf you control. So you're going to want to lean more heavily into the wolf aspect than the elves. However, there's a lot of utility that elves provide that you can fit into the deck that take up other slots, like removal or ramp or things like that. I think the most obvious way to get as many wolves as we can to draw a bunch of cards off our commander is going to be through the wolf tokens. First one here, Faldorn, Dread Wolf Herald, 1, a red and a green for a 3/3 human druid. Whenever you cast a spell from exile or a land enters the battlefield under your control from exile, you create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. You can also pay 1, tap this, discard a card, and impulse draw from the top of your library, and you can play this turn. So basically what you're doing here is you are trading out cards in your hand to impulse draw off the top, and then when you do that, you also get a 2/2 wolf from it. And the best wolf token creator in the deck by far, Hollowhenge Overlord, 4 green for a 4/4 wolf with flash. At the beginning of your upkeep, for each creature you control that's a wolf or a werewolf, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. This also counts your wolf tokens. Say you only have this and 5 other wolf tokens. You're creating 6 more 2/2 wolf tokens, and then the next turn you create 11. It's exponential after that. It's insane that it doesn't say non-token on there. One thing I will say, if you're thinking about building this deck, I think this one's going to go up in price. I think it already has just a little bit, so if you don't have your copy, I'd suggest picking it up now. Not financial advice. However, once you have those wolf tokens out, growing ranks 2 and 2 hybrid Selesnya mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you just populate. So there's a couple other spells that do the populate thing. I didn't throw them in here. I thought it wasn't really necessary to put that much populate. Same thing with like the token doublers. I didn't want to throw those in here, mainly because they're expensive, but I feel like growing ranks, you get this out by like turn 3 or 4. Then you can just populate those wolf tokens. Another great utility piece here, Howling Moon, 2 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target wolf or werewolf you control gets +2/+2 until end of turn. That's great because we're planning on winning with our giant wolves once we pump them up with our commander, so giving that little +2/+2 buff is also nice. Whenever an opponent casts their second spell each turn, however, you create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. So this is a buff, and it also creates 2/2 wolves. I guess it does depend on your opponents to be casting spells, but that's not much of a stipulation, seeing as everybody wants to cast 2 spells in a turn. Bit of a late game play here. Kessig Cagebreakers, 4 and a green for a 3/4 human rogue. Whenever Kessig Cagebreakers attacks, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token that's tapped and attacking for each creature card in your graveyard. So unfortunately with this one, it won't trigger with our commander, seeing as how when our commander goes to attack, we won't have made the 2/2 wolves off of the Kessig Cagebreakers. However, we will have them for the next turn, so I think it's definitely worth it running in this deck. Another one that depends on our opponents, but it is a little bit of protection. Silverfur Partisan, 2 and a green for a 2/2 wolf warrior with trample. Whenever a wolf or werewolf you control becomes the target of an instant or sorcery spell, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token onto the battlefield. So when our opponents inevitably try to kill our Hollowhenge Overlord or something like that, at least we get a replacement 2/2 wolf for them doing that. Next up, Wolfbriar Elemental, 2 green for a 4/4 elemental with multi-kicker for just 1 green. Whenever Wolfbriar Elemental enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token for each time it was kicked. So again, another late game play here. I think once you have a lot of mana from our mana dorks and things like that later in the game, you can pump a bunch of mana into this and get a bunch of wolves, and you're drawing a bunch of cards off your commander. Lastly, for the token category, Varis, Silverymoon Ranger, 1 green for a 3/3 human elf ranger with reach and ward 1. Whenever you cast a creature or a planeswalker spell, venture into the dungeon. Its ability triggers only once each turn, and whenever you complete a dungeon, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. Now, I don't think this is the best when it comes to this category, but I have a personal affinity for this card. I was planning on building this, and I put most of this deck together. However, I never actually finished it, so to be able to throw it in a deck like this and actually get it to work is a pretty cool addition, I think. We also have some wolves that are not just tokens. First up, Rot Wolf, 2 and a green for a 2/2 wolf with infect. That's also great. Seeing as how we're going to be pumping up our wolves with our commander, it is very likely that we get in for a infect kill with our Rot Wolf. Not sure if it's necessary. However, it also says whenever a creature dealt damage by Rot Wolf this turn is put into a graveyard, you may draw a card. So it's either they block and we draw a card, or they die to the infect, most likely a little bit later in the game. So just a great addition to our wolf lineup. And of course, you can have a Voja deck without the Tolsimirs in it. Friend to Wolves, first up, 2 green, white, 3/3 Elf Scout. When Tolsimir, Friend to Wolves, enters the battlefield, create Voja. Friend to Elves, a legendary 3/3 green and white wolf creature token. And whenever a wolf enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 3 life, and that creature fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. So you don't have to. If you're making those 2/2s and nobody has as a 1/1. You don't have to have it fight. However, some of the bigger wolves, you're probably going to want to use the fight mechanic with Tolsimir here to be able to kill some of your opponent's creatures. Also, the gain 3 life on every single wolf ETB. I like that it's not cast because that also counts our tokens. And of course, the new Tolsimir here, Midnight's Light, 2 green, white for a 3/2 elf scout with lifelink. When Tolsimir Midnight's Light enters the battlefield, create Voja Fenstalker, a legendary 5/5 green and white wolf creature token with trample. And whenever a wolf you control attacks, if Tolsimir attacked this combat, target creature and opponent controls blocks that wolf this combat if able. The good thing about Tolsimir in a wolf tribal deck is that I'm pretty sure his second ability triggers for each wolf that attacks, because it says whenever a wolf you control attacks. It doesn't say one or more, it says whenever a wolf. That means obviously with your commander you're gonna have a bunch of huge wolves and you swing out with 4 of them. You can have those wolves be forced to be blocked by a specific creature that an opponent controls. Obviously they're value pieces and smaller creatures that they're not normally going to be attacking or blocking with. We can get those picked off out of the way with our Tolsimir Midnight's Light. So that is a lot of wolves we have in the deck, but we're going to go over some of the elves here. They primarily fill up the ramp category. We're going to go over some different ways that we can use them. First up, Mina and Den Wildborn, 2 red, green for a 4/4 elf ally. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and you can pay a red and a green to return a land you control to its owner's hand, and target creature gains trample until end of turn. Both are really good abilities, especially the first one, seeing as how we're drawing who knows how many cards off of our commander's attack trigger a little bit later in the game. Play additional lands on each of our turns, seeing as how we're always going to have extra lands in our hand with all the card draw. And what green does best when it comes to mana dorks, Elvish Mystic style cards, 1 green mana for a 1/1 elf druid, tap, add green. Pretty self-explanatory. However, this does add to the count of the +1/+1 counters we're getting off of our commander. You also want land fetching with Farhaven Elf, 2 and a green, 1/1 elf druid. When it enters the battlefield, you search out a basic land, put on the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. So instead of running like a Rampant Growth or a Cultivate or something like that, you want to use Farhaven Elf because that again adds to the count for your commander's ability. And I didn't even throw Soul Ring in this deck. I only put 1 mana Rockets, Decanter of Endless Water, 3 mana for an artifact. You have no max hand size, and you tap this to add 1 mana of any color. This is mainly in here for the no max hand size. We only have Reliquary Tower for that effect. We're going to be drawing so many cards in this deck. I feel like you're going to need a few no max hand size cards to be able to keep the ones that you want. I suppose it's not absolutely necessary, but if you want to, you can also throw in Thought Vessel. And once we have all of our wolves and elves out on the battlefield, we want to buff them up either with our commander's ability or with some other abilities. So I'm going to go over some options here. Arlinn Kord up first, 2 red, green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. The +1 is until end of turn, up to 1 target creature, gets +2/+2 and gains vigilance and haste. Pay 0, put a 2/2 green wolf creature token into play, and then you transform Arlinn Kord into Arlinn Embraced by the Moon. The +1 on this says creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. That trample is really useful when our entire team has 5 +1/+1 counters on it and we're trying to swing in for lethal. There's a few other trample enablers I'll go into later, but the -1, Arlinn Embraced by the Moon, deals 3 damage to target creature or player, and then you transform it back. Then if you want to do that, you can create more of the wolf tokens if you'd like, or you can save it for the -6. You get an emblem with creatures you control have haste, and tap, this creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature or player. This is a game ender. If you can get to this ult, your opponents are pretty much screwed. There's no way they're coming back from that game because you pump up your wolves. You don't even have to attack with them. You attack with your Voja, put a bunch of counters on everything, and then you tap them all, deal a bunch of damage to people's faces. I like how it's not fighting either, so it deals damage to them and not back to your creatures. Like I said, we have other trample enablers. Howlpack Resurgence, 2 and a green for an enchantment with flash. Each creature you control that's a wolf or werewolf gets +1/+1 and has trample. Trample is a necessity in a deck like this if we're planning on closing out the game with combat damage, which we definitely are. Mirror Entity up next. Absolute slam dunk in this deck. I thought it was good just for the buff, but let me read it here. 2 and a white, 1/1 shapeshifter with changeling. Pay X until end of turn. Creatures you control have base power and toughness XX and gain all creature types. So this one's a really interesting one. If you want to just pay a little bit of mana, 1 or 2 mana into this, until end of turn, everything becomes a 1/1 or a 2/2, however much mana you want to put into it, but they gain all creature types. So when you go to attacks with your commander, you'll put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on those creatures, and you'll draw a bunch of cards for every creature you have in play because they're wolves and elves. So even if you don't have a lot of mana to pump into this to make your team huge, obviously you can, but you don't have to, you will get a huge buff just from your commander alone. Another easy way to close out the game, Pyreheart Wolf, 2 and a red, 1/1 wolf. It says, whenever Pyreheart Wolf attacks, each creature you control gains menace until end of turn. Also has Undying, so if this would die, it comes back with the +1/+1 counter. Lastly here, Somberwald Beastmaster, 6 and a green, a little bit more expensive, but I think the payoff is worth it here. It's a 1/1 human ranger. When Somberwald Beastmaster enters the battlefield, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token, a 3/3 green beast creature token, and a 4/4 green beast creature token. Creature tokens you control have death touch. Not that you need help drawing cards in this deck, but I felt since we do have a 5 mana commander, we do want to put a few other options just in case either he dies a lot or it's a little bit earlier in the game and you need some card draw. So first up, Idol of Oblivion, 2 mana for an artifact, tap, draw a card, activate only if you created a token this turn. You can also pay 8 tap, sacrifice this, and create a 10/10 Eldrazi, which is not irrelevant. I have done that before and killed someone with it, so it is a pretty decent ability, but mainly we want this for the card draw, seeing as how we're creating a ton of tokens, being the 2/2 wolf tokens. As early as turn 2, we can start drawing cards with this. Got a fantastic include here from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's Kutzil, Malamet, Exemplar, 1 green, white for a 3/3 cat warrior. Says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, which is just fantastic in this deck, seeing as how we can go from having a pretty small board to a huge one and swinging for lethal in just one turn. I feel like having that Grand Abolisher effect on the board is fantastic. It also says whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So again, even if your commander happens to die, but your team still is pumped up from your commander's ability when it was alive, you can swing with this guy and get a bunch of draw triggers. Lastly here, Realm Walker, 2 and a green, 2/3 shapeshifter changeling. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You may look at the top card of your library anytime and cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. So you're probably going to be choosing wolf since we have mostly wolves in the deck. This counts as a wolf and an elf, so it triggers our commander and it lets us cast stuff off the top of our library, which isn't exactly card draw, but it's pretty close. Another category for the elves removal, we have Nullmage Shepherd up first, 3 and a green for a 2/4 elf shaman. You can tap 4 untapped creatures you control to destroy target artifact or enchantment. Not a terrible ability, seeing as how we're going to have a lot of creature tokens on the battlefield. Also, Reclamation Sage, 2 and a green for a 2/1 elf shaman. When it ETBs, destroy target artifact or enchantment. So you can see how you have a lot of elves and other little categories that help add those +1/+1 counters onto your team, but you don't need to go full into the tribal aspect of it. You could just do the little ETB effects like Reclamation Sage. Last category I'm talking about here, the utility, just some cards that make the deck run a little bit smoother, but don't exactly fit into some of the other categories. First up, I'm talking about Elvish Piper, 3 and a green for a 1/1 elf shaman. Pay a green, tap this, and you may put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Really good for some of our 5, 6, 7 mana creatures. Also, it is an elf, I may point out. So if you have this a little bit early, you can cheat out some of your bigger creatures with it. Of course, you're in a multiple creature type deck. Maskwood Nexus, 4 mana for an artifact. Creatures you control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't to the battlefield. You can also pay 3 and tap it to create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with changeling. This just turns all of our creatures into elves and wolves, and that gets both of the triggers off our commander. Similarly, I have Shields of Velis Vel. It's 1 mana for a tribal instant. Creatures target player controls gets +0/+1 and gains all creature types until end of turn. So similar to Maskwood Nexus, but this one is unfortunately just a one-shot, but there's not many other effects in the game that do this, so to be able to have that base covered by multiple cards is pretty nice. As with every aggro strategy, if you are committing a ton of creatures to the board, you need a lot of protection spells, such as Unbreakable Formation, 2 and a white for an instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Also has Addendum, which means if you cast this during your main phase, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures, and they gain Vigilance until end of turn. So we're pretty much never going to be using it then. We're only saving this for when our opponents are going to use a board wipe or something like that to save all of our hard work that we put so much effort into. And lastly here, our only 3-color card, I believe, Shalai and Hallar, 1 red, green, white for a 3/3 angel elf. Also cool that it's an elf. Flying Vigilance, but the ability is the most important part of this. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, Shalai and Hallar deals that much damage to target opponent. Yeah, this can end the game all on its own as long as you have a bunch of elves out. Like say you only have 4 elves out, which is a pretty moderate number, and you have just your commander and 4 elves. You're putting 4 +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. That times 5 is 20 damage to target opponent. So you can do 4 damage up to 5 times, which could be 20 to one person, or 20 split up however you'd like it. So that's it for Voja, Jaws of the Conclave. This deck is a powerhouse for sure. Like I said, these wolves are pretty old and pretty scarce. I'm not sure how many they're reprinting in this set, but I recommend probably picking up some of the more popular ones before they get too expensive. But if you'd like to check out the full deck list, I have my Architect link down in the description. Go ahead and feel free to give it a click. What do you guys think of Voja? Are you planning on building him as soon as the new set comes out? I don't think I'll be building this one myself. It does seem pretty fun, but I feel like it's pretty dependent on your commander. Also, people can see this coming, so they're obviously going to plan around your commander as soon as it comes out. They're probably going to save their 4 mana for their Swords of Plowshares to pay for the Ward 3 and kill it. However, if you like that kind of strategy where you are probably going to be the arch enemy, then this is a pretty cool deck for you. So that's all I've got for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, please feel free to leave a like down below or subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. All right, take care.